The fever had settled into Harrison Zane's lungs 3 weeks ago, and he had not stopped working a single day since. He coughed so hard each morning that blood flecked his handkerchief, but the cattle needed feeding, the fences needed mending, and the ranch would not run itself no matter how much his chest burned with every breath he drew into his failing body. It was late September in 1883, and the Arizona Territory sun still beat down mercilessly on the sprawling ranch outside Tucson. Harrison wiped sweat from his brow as he hauled another bucket of water toward the trough, his vision swimming with spots that had nothing to do with the glare. The bucket felt like it weighed 100 pounds, though it could not have been more than 20. His arms shook with the effort, and when another coughing fit seized him, he dropped to one knee in the dust, pressing his fist against his mouth as his whole body convulsed. The ranch hands had quit 2 months back when he could no longer afford to pay them. His father had died that same summer, leaving Harrison with a failing cattle operation, mounting debts, and a reputation in town for being too proud to ask for help. At 26 years old, he had inherited a legacy of stubbornness along with the land, and he would be damned if he let either one go without a fight. He forced himself back to his feet, retrieved the bucket, and continued toward the water trough. The cattle loathed their displeasure at his slowness. His horse, a bay gelding named Copper, watched from the corral with what Harrison imagined was concern in his dark eyes. Everything hurt. His head pounded in rhythm with his heart, and his lungs felt full of broken glass. But there was work to be done. That evening, as the sun painted the desert sky in shades of orange and purple, Harrison collapsed on his way back to the house. He tried to stand 3 times, but his legs would not cooperate. Finally, he simply lay there in the dirt, staring up at the first stars beginning to appear, thinking that this might be how it ended. Alone on his father's land, too stubborn to have asked for help when he still could. Consciousness came and went. At some point he heard hoofbeats, but he could not turn his head to look. Voices floated above him, a woman's voice, urgent and clear. "Good Lord, he is burning up. Help me get him inside." Harrison wanted to protest that he did not need help, that he could manage on his own as he always had, but his mouth would not form the words. Strong hands lifted him, and then everything went dark. When awareness returned, he was in his own bed, but the light coming through the window was different, softer. Morning light, he realized dimly. How long had he been unconscious? He tried to sit up, but a gentle hand pressed against his shoulder. "Do not even think about it," the woman's voice said firmly. "You are in no condition to go anywhere." Harrison's vision cleared enough to see her properly. She was perhaps 23 or 24, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical braid and green eyes that studied him with a mixture of concern and determination. Her dress was simple but well made, suitable for work rather than show. He did not recognize her. "Who are you?" His voice came out as barely more than a rasp. "Violet Warren," she said, dipping a cloth in cool water and pressing it to his forehead. "I am staying at the boarding house in town. I was riding out this way yesterday evening when I found you collapsed in your yard. My horse is stabled in your barn if you're worried about that." "I need to get up," Harrison said, though even forming the words exhausted him. "The cattle need feeding. The fences on the north pasture need work." "The cattle have been fed," Violet said calmly. "I took care of it this morning. The fences can wait until you are not dying of pneumonia." "I am not dying." "You are doing an admirable impression of it, then." She wrung out the cloth and refreshed it with cool water. "When was the last time you saw a doctor?" Harrison tried to remember. "A couple months back. He said I needed rest." He almost laughed, but it triggered a coughing fit that left him gasping. Violet helped him sit up slightly, supporting his back until the coughing subsided. "And did you rest?" "Could not afford to. The ranch needs tending." "The ranch will not benefit from you working yourself to death." She eased him back down onto the pillows. "I sent word to town this morning. Dr. Hammond should be here by noon. I cannot pay for a doctor. Then it is fortunate I can. Her tone left no room for argument. Now you need to drink this. She lifted a cup to his lips. It was broth, warm and salty. His stomach rebelled at first, but she was patient and persistent, and eventually he managed to swallow several mouthfuls. "Why are you doing this?" Harrison asked when she finally set the cup aside. Violet was quiet for a moment, her hands folding the damp cloth into neat squares. "Because someone needs to, and apparently no one else has. I have been in Tucson for 2 weeks now, and I have heard the talk in town. About how Harrison Zane is too proud to accept help. About how you have been working yourself into the ground since your father passed. About how the ranch is failing and you along with it." She met his eyes directly. "Pride is all well and good, Mr. Zane, but it makes for poor company in a grave." He wanted to argue, to tell her he had everything under control, but they both knew it would be a lie. Instead, he asked, "Wait, what brings you to Tucson?" "I was living in Colorado with my uncle after my parents died," she said, settling into the chair beside his bed. "He passed this spring, and I found myself at loose ends. I had heard that the Arizona Territory needed teachers, so I came down with the intention of opening a school. But I am discovering that Tucson has other plans for me, it seems." "You are a teacher?" "I was, and I will be again, I hope. But right now you need tending more than the children in town need their lessons Bari." She stood and checked the water basin. "Dr. Hammond will want to examine you when he arrives. Until then, you are to rest. Actually rest, Mr. Zane. If I catch you trying to get out of that bed, I will tie you to it." Despite everything, Harrison felt the corner of his mouth twitch. "You are a hard woman, Miss Warren." "Someone needs to be." But there was warmth in her voice, and something else he could not quite identify. Determination, perhaps, or compassion. Dr. Hammond arrived just after noon, a rotund man with kind eyes and capable hands. He examined Harrison thoroughly, his expression growing graver with each passing minute. "It is pneumonia, as Miss Warren suspected," he said finally, packing his instruments back into his leather bag. "Advanced pneumonia, I am afraid. You should have been in bed weeks ago, Mr. Zane." "I had work to do." "And now you may not live to finish it," the doctor said bluntly. "Your lungs are badly inflamed. You need complete bed rest, nutritious food, and constant care. Even with all that, the next few days will be critical. If the fever breaks, you have a chance. If it does not—" He left the sentence unfinished. Violet walked the doctor out, and Harrison heard their voices in low conversation on the porch. When she returned, her expression was set with resolve. "I am staying," she said simply. "The doctor agrees that you cannot be left alone. I will tend to you and keep the ranch running as best I can." "You cannot do that. You have your own life, your plans for the school." "The school will still be there in a few weeks. You might not be." She began gathering up the soiled linens. "Besides, I grew up on a ranch in Colorado. I know my way around cattle and horses. Your place is not so large that I cannot manage the basics." Harrison wanted to protest, but another coughing fit seized him, this one worse than the others. Violet was there immediately, supporting him, wiping away the blood that appeared on his lips. When it passed, he was too weak to do anything but lie back and accept what was happening. "I will pay you back," he managed. "Somehow." "I am not asking for payment, Rear," Violet said quietly. "I am asking you to let someone help you. Can you do that, Harrison Zane?" It was the hardest thing he had ever done, but he nodded. The next 3 days were a blur of fever and delirium. Harrison drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes waking to find Violet spooning broth into his mouth, sometimes seeing her silhouetted against the window as she kept vigil through the night. In his lucid moments, he heard the sounds of the ranch continuing outside, cattle lowing, the pump handle creaking as she drew water, the rhythmic thud of an axe splitting wood. She was doing it all, he realized. Feeding the animals, maintaining the property, caring for him. This stranger who had every reason to ride past his ranch and none to stop. On the 4th morning, the fever broke. Harrison woke with a clear head for the first time in what felt like forever. The room was bright with morning sun, and Violet was asleep in the chair beside his bed, her head resting on her folded arms on the edge of the mattress. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but peaceful in sleep. He studied her face, really looked at her for the first time without the haze of fever distorting his vision. She was beautiful, he realized, but it was more than that. There was strength in the set of her jaw, kindness in the curve of her mouth. This woman had saved his life, had put her own plans on hold to care for a stranger who most of the town had written off as a lost cause. As if sensing his gaze, Violet stirred and lifted her head. For a moment she looked disoriented, and then her eyes focused on him. Relief flooded her features. "Your fever broke," she said, reaching out to press her palm against his forehead. Her hand was cool and soft. "Thank God. I was beginning to worry." "How long have I been sick?" 4 days since I found you. 3 weeks before that, from what I can gather." She stretched, wincing as her back protested. "You have been a terrible patient, I should tell you. Even delirious, you kept trying to get up to check on the cattle. I am sorry. Do not apologize. Just promise me you will actually rest now that you are on the mend." She stood and moved to the window, pushing it open to let in fresh air. "You are not out of danger yet. Pneumonia is not something to take lightly." "The ranch is fine. I have been managing. Your cattle are fed and watered. I repaired the broken section of fence in the north pasture. The barn needed mucking out, so I took care of that too. Your horse is a sweetheart. By the way, much better tempered than the one I learned to ride on back in Colorado." Harrison tried to process this. "You repaired the fence? It was not that difficult. I watched my father and uncle mend fences hundreds of times. I just did what they did." She turned back to him, and there was a glint of humor in her eyes. "Why? Did you think teaching was the only skill I possessed?" "I suppose I did not think about it at all. Men rarely do." But she was smiling as she said it. "Now, you need to eat something more substantial than broth. Do you think you could manage some eggs and toast?" His stomach growled in answer, and Violet laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "I will take that as a yes." She left him to rest while she prepared breakfast in the kitchen. Harrison lay there, listening to the comfortable sounds of someone else moving through his house. It had been so quiet since his father died, so empty. He had grown accustomed to the silence, to the solitude. But this was different. This felt like home in a way it had not for months. When Violet returned with a tray of food, he managed to sit up with her help. The eggs were perfectly cooked, the toast golden brown. He ate slowly, savoring each bite while she watched with approval. "Where did you learn to cook?" he asked between mouthfuls. "My mother taught me before she died. Then I took over the cooking at my uncle's ranch after his wife passed. It was just the two of us for nearly 5 years." A shadow passed over her face. "He was a good man. I still miss him." "I'm sorry for your loss." "And I for yours. The people in town speak well of your father. They say he was an honest man if a stubborn one." Harrison almost smiled. "That he was. Stubborn to a fault. I suppose I inherited that from him along with the ranch." "Stubbornness is not always a bad thing," Violet said thoughtfully. "It kept you alive these past weeks, I imagine, but there is a difference between being stubborn and being foolish. You crossed that line somewhere back there." "I know." He set down his fork, no longer able to meet her eyes. "I just could not stand the thought of losing this place. My father worked his whole life to build it. After he died, keeping it running felt like the only way to honor him, but I was losing it anyway. One day at a time. The hands left because I could not pay them. The bank is breathing down my neck about the mortgage. I thought if I just worked hard enough, if I just refused to give up." "You could will it into success," Violet finished softly. "I understand that feeling. I had it after my uncle died. I wanted so badly to keep his ranch running, to prove I could do it on my own. But sometimes, Harrison, We need to accept that we cannot do everything alone. Sometimes we need help, and there is no shame in that. You gave up your uncle's ranch? She nodded. I sold it to a neighbor who had been wanting to expand his holdings. It broke my heart, but it was the right decision. I could not manage it alone, and I had no money to hire help. The sale gave me enough to start fresh somewhere new. To pursue teaching like I always wanted, she paused. But I still think about it sometimes. Wonder if I gave up too easily. You did not give up. You made a choice. That is different. Then perhaps you need to make a choice too, she said gently. Not to give up, but to decide what you are really fighting for. Is it the ranch itself, or is it your pride? The question hit harder than any physical blow could have. Harrison lay back against the pillows, exhausted from the small effort of eating. I do not know anymore, he admitted. Maybe they have become the same thing in my mind. Violet collected the empty dishes onto the tray. Well, you have time to figure it out. Right now, you need to focus on getting well. The rest will still be here when you are strong enough to face it. Over the next week, Harrison slowly regained his strength. Violet would not let him do any work, despite his protests. Instead, he watched from the porch as she tended the ranch with capable efficiency. She rose before dawn each morning to feed the cattle, spending her days on tasks that range from mending tack to checking the water supply in the various troughs scattered across the property. In the evenings, she would cook dinner, and they would eat together, talking about everything and nothing. He learned that she had been teaching children in a small schoolhouse outside Denver before her uncle's death had brought her south. She loved reading, particularly novels by authors like Louisa May Alcott and Charles Dickens. She played the piano, though she had not touched one since leaving Colorado. Her favorite time of day was early morning when the world was still quiet and full of possibility. In turn, he told her about growing up on the ranch, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the dreams he and his father had shared for expanding the cattle operation. He talked about his mother, who had died when he was 12, and how the house had never quite felt warm again after she was gone. He even admitted his fears about losing the ranch, about being the one who failed where his father had succeeded. Your father had help, Violet pointed out one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. He had your mother, had ranch hands, had you as you got older. You have been trying to do the work of 4 or 5 people all by yourself. That is not failure, Harrison. That is just mathematics. I should have asked for help sooner. Perhaps, but you are accepting it now, and that matters. She glanced at him, and there was something new in her expression, something that made his heart beat faster. Besides, I'm glad I found you when I did. If I had ridden past that evening. She did not finish the sentence, but she did not need to. They both knew how close he had come to dying alone in the dirt. Why did you stop? Harrison asked. You said you were just riding past. You could have kept going. Should have, probably. It was not your problem. Violet was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun was painting the sky in brilliant shades of red and gold. I saw you lying there, and I thought of my uncle. He died alone too, you know. Had a heart attack in the barn. By the time I found him, it was too late. I have lived with that guilt ever since, wondering if I could have saved him if I'd been there sooner, if I had checked on him just an hour earlier. She turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I saw you lying there, and I thought, not again. I will not let someone else die alone if I can help it. Without thinking, Harrison reached out and took her hand. It fit perfectly in his, small and strong and warm. You saved my life, Violet. I will never be able to repay that debt. I do not want repayment. Her fingers tightened around his. I want you to live. I want you to fight for this ranch because it matters to you, not because you're trying to prove something to a dead man or a town full of strangers. I want you to let people help you when you need it. Can you do that? I can try, Harrison said. And then, because the moment felt right, and because he had come too close to death not to take chances when they presented themselves, he added, especially if you are the one offering the help. A blush crept up Violet's cheeks. visible even in the fading light. "Harrison Zane, are you flirting with me?" "I might be. I am a bit out of practice, so forgive me if I'm doing it poorly." She laughed, that wind chime sound he had come to love. "You're doing just fine." They sat there in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, their hands still clasped together. Harrison felt something shift inside him, something fundamental. For the first time since his father's death, he did not feel alone. For the first time in weeks, he felt hope. By the end of the second week, Harrison was strong enough to start helping with light chores. Violet reluctantly agreed to let him feed the chickens and collect eggs, but nothing more strenuous. He chafed at the restrictions, but forced himself to comply. She had saved his life. The least he could do was follow her instructions. They fell into an easy routine. Harrison would wake to find her already up and moving, coffee brewing on the stove, and breakfast underway. They would eat together, discussing the day's tasks, and then Violet would head out to tackle the heavier work while Harrison managed what he could from closer to the house. In the afternoons, they would often work side by side on smaller projects, repairing tack, sorting through supplies, planning for the future. It was during one of these afternoon work sessions that Harrison made a decision. "I want you to stay," he said abruptly, looking up from the bridle he was oiling. "Not just until I'm fully recovered, I mean permanently. I want to hire you as a partner in the ranch." Violet, who had been mending a tear in one of his shirts, went very still. "Harrison, Hear me out," he said quickly. "I have been thinking about what you said about how my father had help, and I have been trying to do everything alone. You were right. I cannot manage this place by myself. And even if I could afford to hire hands again, I would just be back in the same situation trying to oversee everything, burning myself out. But if I had a partner, someone who understood the work and cared about the success of the operation." He trailed off, searching her face for some reaction. "What about my teaching?" she asked softly. "That was my plan, remember? To open a school in Tucson." "You could still do that. Tucson is only a few miles away. You could teach during the day and come back here in the evenings. Or we could build a small schoolhouse right here on the property. There are several families in the area who would likely send their children." He was speaking faster now, the ideas tumbling out. "We could make this work, Violet. I know we could." She set down the shirt and the needle, folding her hands in her lap. "And what exactly are you proposing, Mr. Zane? A business arrangement?" The way she said it, careful and measured, made Harrison's heart sink. He had overstepped, presumed too much. They had known each other for barely 2 weeks. What right did he have to ask her to change her life? But then he looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the question in her eyes. She was not refusing. She was asking him to be clear about what he wanted. Harrison set aside the bridle and moved closer, taking her hands in his. "No," he said quietly, "not a business arrangement. Violet, I know this is fast. I know we have not known each other long, but these past 2 weeks have meant more to me than I can put into words. You have not just saved my life, you have given me a reason to keep living. When I think about the future now, I cannot imagine it without you in it. Harrison," her voice was barely a whisper, "I am not asking you to marry me right this moment," he continued, though the thought had certainly crossed his mind more than once. "I am asking you to stay, to give us a chance to become whatever it might be. If teaching is your dream, I will support that however I can. But I hope, maybe, that there could be room in your dreams for this ranch. For me." Violet's eyes were shining with tears, but she was smiling. "You are asking me to take a considerable gamble, you know. Staying here, building a life with you, there are no guarantees." "No, there are not," Harrison agreed. "But I promise you this. I will work every day to make sure you never regret the choice. I will support your dreams, listen to your concerns, and value your opinions. This would be a true partnership, Violet, in every sense of the word." She was quiet for a long moment, and Harrison held his breath, waiting. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Yes," she said. Yes, I will stay. We will see where this road takes us. The joy that flooded through Harrison was almost overwhelming. He pulled her into an embrace, careful of his still healing lungs, and felt her arms wrap around him in return. She fit perfectly against him, as if she had been designed for this exact spot. Thank you, he murmured into her hair. You will not regret this. I know, she said, and there was absolute certainty in her voice. That evening, they rode into Tucson together to inform the boarding house that Violet would be moving out. The proprietress, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Henderson, gave them a knowing look that made Violet blush and Harrison laugh. News would be all over town by morning, he knew, but he found he did not care. Let people talk. He had found something precious, something worth any amount of gossip. They stopped by the general store to pick up supplies, and Harrison introduced Violet to Tom Patterson, the store's owner, and one of the few people in town who had offered to help during his father's final illness. So you are the one who has been keeping the Zane place running, Tom said, shaking Violet's hand warmly. I heard rumors someone had moved in, but I figured it was just talk. Good to know Harrison finally got some sense and accepted help. She is more than help, Harrison said, sliding an arm around Violet's waist. She is my partner, in the ranch, and if I have anything to say about it, in life. Tom's weathered face broke into a wide grin. Well now, that is the best news I have heard in months. Congratulations to you both. Harrison's father would be glad to know someone is finally taking care of his stubborn son. They loaded their supplies into the wagon and headed back to the ranch as twilight deepened into night. The desert air was cooling rapidly, as it always did after sunset, and Harrison draped a blanket around Violet's shoulders. She leaned against him, comfortable and trusting, and he thought that this must be what happiness felt like. Not the absence of problems, but the presence of someone to face them with. Over the next weeks, they worked together to get the ranch back on solid footing. Violet proved to be every bit as capable as she had claimed. She could handle a horse as well as any cowboy, could fix a fence line with quick efficiency, and had a natural way with the cattle that made managing them easier. But it was her head for numbers that truly impressed Harrison. She went through his father's ledgers, organizing the chaos into clear columns of income and expenses. We are not as bad off as you thought, she announced one evening, spreading the ledgers across the kitchen table. You have assets you have not been accounting for properly. If we sell off some of the older cattle, the ones past breeding age, we can raise enough to make the next mortgage payment and have some left over for repairs. And look here, your father had a contract with the Army fort near Phoenix to supply beef. That contract is still valid, but you never followed up on it after he died. Harrison studied the numbers, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. I had no idea. I just kept trying to keep things running day to day. I never stepped back to look at the bigger picture. That is because you were too busy trying to do everything yourself. Violet made a few more notes in the margin. We need to hire at least 2 hands if we are going to fulfill this contract. Can you think of anyone reliable? There is Miguel Santos and his brother Rafael. They worked for my father before I had to let them go. Good men, hard workers. They might be willing to come back if we can pay them properly this time. Then let us talk to them tomorrow. Violet closed the ledger with a satisfied nod. We are going to make this work, Harrison. I can feel it. He pulled her into his arms, marveling at how natural it had become to hold her, to have her near. We already are making it work. This, what you have done with the books, the way you have organized everything, I could never have managed it alone. That is the point of a partnership, she said, smiling up at him. We each bring our strengths to the table. Together, we are better than either of us could be alone. He kissed her then, unable to resist the temptation any longer. Her lips were soft and warm, and she kissed him back with an enthusiasm that made his heart race. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. I love you, Harrison said, the words coming out before he could think better of them. I know it is soon, but I do. I love you, Violet Warren. Her eyes filled with tears, but she was laughing. I love you too, you stubborn, wonderful man. I think I have loved you since that first morning when you tried to get out of bed to check on the cattle, even though you could barely stand. That is a terrible reason to fall in love with someone. Perhaps, but it showed me who you are. Someone who cares deeply, who commits fully, who never gives up. She cupped his face in her hands. Those are exactly the qualities I want in a partner, in a husband, if you are still interested in that possibility. Harrison's breath caught. Are you proposing to me, Miss Warren? I am suggesting that we might want to consider making this partnership official, she said primly, but her eyes were dancing with mischief. Purely for practical reasons. You understand, it would make the business arrangements much simpler. Purely practical, Harrison agreed, grinning. In that case, yes, absolutely yes. I want to marry you, Violet. I want to build a life with you, raise a family, grow old together on this ranch, if you will have me. I will have you, she said, and kissed him again. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the Catholic Church in Tucson. Miguel and Rafael Santos stood as witnesses, along with Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house, who cried through the entire service. Dr. Hammond was there, beaming with satisfaction at seeing his patient not only recovered but happy. Even Tom Patterson closed his store for the afternoon to attend. Violet wore a simple dress of cream-colored muslin that she had sewn herself, with wildflowers from the ranch braided into her hair. Harrison had bought a new suit for the occasion, his first in years, and felt awkward and wonderful all at once. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison kissed his bride with all the love and gratitude that filled his heart, and the small congregation erupted in cheers. They held a celebration at the ranch that evening, with food and music and dancing under the stars. Miguel played guitar while Rafael kept time with a set of spoons, and people Harrison barely knew showed up to wish them well. It seemed that the town had been waiting for something good to happen, and his marriage to Violet provided exactly that. As the party wound down and the guests began to depart, Harrison and Violet stood together on the porch watching the last wagons disappear down the road. Happy? Harrison asked, pulling his wife close. Happier than I have been in years, Violet admitted. This feels right, Harrison. Like coming home after a long journey. It is home, he said firmly. Our home now. For as long as we both shall live. They went inside together, and Harrison closed the door on the old life, the lonely life. Ahead of them lay challenges. Certainly the ranch still needed work, money would be tight for a while yet, and running a cattle operation in the Arizona territory was never easy. But they would face it all together, and that made all the difference. The next months were a blur of hard work and happiness. With Miguel and Rafael back on the payroll, the ranch began to thrive again. They fulfilled the Army contract, delivering 100 head of cattle to the fort near Phoenix and earning enough to pay off a significant portion of the mortgage. Violet began teaching 3 mornings a week in a small schoolhouse they built on the eastern edge of the property, with 8 students from neighboring ranches attending. In the afternoon, she returned to ranch work, managing the books and helping with whatever needed doing. Harrison's health fully returned, his lungs clear and strong again. He never forgot how close he had come to death, never took for granted the second chance he had been given. Every morning he woke beside Violet and counted himself the luckiest man alive. On a cool evening in March of 1884, 6 months after their wedding, Violet made an announcement that changed everything. I am pregnant, she said simply, looking up from her sewing with a smile that outshone the sun. Harrison, who had been reading a cattle auction notice, dropped the paper and crossed the room in 3 strides. Are you certain? As certain as I can be. Dr. Hammond confirmed it yesterday when I rode into town for supplies. She laughed at his expression. You look terrified. I am terrified, Harrison admitted, and thrilled, and completely unprepared. We need to get a proper cradle, and baby clothes, and... Violet stood and placed a finger over his lips, stopping the tumble of words. We have 6 months to prepare, my love. We will be ready. A father, Harrison said wonderingly. I am going to be a father. And I am going to be a mother. We are going to have a family, Harrison, a real family. He pulled her into his arms. careful of her even though she was barely showing yet. A family. Children who would grow up on this land, who would learn to ride and rope and tend cattle. Children who would carry on the legacy his father had started, that he and Violet were rebuilding together. "I love you," he murmured into her hair. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "I know," Violet said. "I feel the same way." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Violet refused to slow down her work until Harrison and the Santos brothers practically forced her to rest. She finally agreed to stop doing the heavier ranch chores in her 6th month, though she continued teaching until the schoolhouse closed for the summer break in May. On a hot August evening, with a thunderstorm rumbling in the distance, Violet went into labor. Harrison sent Raphael racing to town for the doctor and the midwife while he and Miguel did their best to keep Violet comfortable. Mrs. Henderson arrived with Dr. Hammond, taking charge of the situation with calm efficiency. Harrison was banished to the porch while the women worked. He paced back and forth, listening to Violet's cries with a growing sense of helplessness. Miguel sat with him, offering quiet reassurance. "Women are stronger than men in this," Miguel said. "My wife has given me 4 children. Each time, I think I cannot bear to hear her suffer, but she always comes through, and then she hands me this tiny person, and I forget everything but joy." The night stretched on, seemingly endless. The storm broke overhead, rain pounding on the roof, and lightning illuminating the desert in brilliant flashes. And then, just as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Harrison heard a new sound, the wail of a baby. Mrs. Henderson appeared at the door, tired but smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Zane, a healthy boy with a good set of lungs on him." Harrison stumbled into the bedroom, barely registering the organized chaos around him. Violet lay in the bed, pale and exhausted, but radiant with joy. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a clean blanket. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Harrison approached on shaking legs and looked down at the baby. He was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right through Harrison into his soul. The most beautiful thing he had ever seen, aside from Violet herself. "Can I hold him?" Harrison asked, his voice cracking. Violet carefully transferred the baby into his arms. The weight was nothing, insignificant, but the responsibility felt enormous. This tiny person depended on them for everything. This was their son. "What should we name him?" Violet asked. Harrison looked down at the baby, thinking of his own father, of the legacy and the land. "Henry," he said. "Henry James Zane, after my father, if that is acceptable to you." "Henry," Violet repeated, testing the name. "It is perfect." Little Henry James Zane proved to be a colicky baby who slept in fits and starts and seemed determined to keep his parents awake at all hours. Harrison and Violet took turns walking him around the house in the middle of the night, singing lullabies and making soothing sounds that rarely worked. They were exhausted and overwhelmed and utterly in love with their son. Miguel and Raphael covered for Harrison when he was too tired to function properly, taking on extra duties without complaint. The neighboring families brought food and hand-me-down baby clothes and advice that was sometimes helpful and sometimes contradictory. The ranch community, which had seemed so distant when Harrison was struggling alone, embraced the young family with warmth and generosity. As Henry grew from a colicky newborn into a curious infant, the ranch continued to prosper. They added more cattle, repaired the old barn, and built a new bunkhouse for the hands. Violet's school expanded to 12 students, necessitating the addition of a second room. Harrison began breeding horses as a side business, capitalizing on the Army's constant need for quality mounts. On a cool November evening when Henry was just over a year old and toddling around on unsteady legs, Violet and Harrison sat on the porch watching the sunset, as had become their evening ritual. "I have been thinking," Violet said, watching Henry play with a set of wooden blocks Miguel had carved for him, "about how different my life would be if I had ridden past that evening, if I had decided you were not my concern." "I would be dead," Harrison said bluntly. "There is no question about that." and I would be teaching in some schoolhouse in Tucson, living alone in a rented room, wondering if I'd made the right choice coming to Arizona. She leaned against him, fitting into her familiar spot against his shoulder. Instead, I have this: a home, a family, a purpose. I have you. I have you, Harrison echoed, and I wake up grateful for that every single day. You saved me, Violet, not just from the pneumonia, but from myself, from the path I was on. We saved each other, she corrected gently. I was drifting when I came here, looking for something I could not name. You gave me a place to belong, a reason to stay. This ranch, our life together, it has become everything I did not know I needed. Henry chose that moment to toddle over, reaching up with chubby arms to be lifted. Harrison scooped him up, settling the boy on his lap. Henry immediately grabbed for his father's hat, a game he never tired of. "What do you think, Henry?" Harrison asked his son. "Should we keep your mother around?" Henry babbled something incomprehensible and giggled, and both parents laughed. The sound carried across the desert, a sound of joy and contentment and home. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch grew steadily more successful, allowing Harrison to hire additional hands and expand their cattle operation. Violet gave birth to 2 more children, a daughter named Victoria in 1886 and another son named Thomas in 1888. The schoolhouse became a permanent fixture of the community, with Violet teaching when she could and hiring an assistant teacher when the demands of the ranch and her growing family made it impossible to do both. Harrison never forgot those dark weeks when he had worked himself nearly to death, too proud to ask for help. He made sure his children knew the value of community, of accepting assistance when it was offered, of offering help in return. When neighbors faced hardship, the Zane family was always there with food, labor, or whatever was needed. Miguel and Raphael remained with the ranch, becoming like family rather than hired hands. Miguel's eldest son began working alongside his father when he turned 16, learning the trade and planning to take over his father's position eventually. The bunkhouse was always full of laughter and good-natured arguing, and the ranch felt alive in a way it never had when Harrison was struggling alone. On a warm spring evening in 1890, Harrison and Violet stood in the same spot where he had collapsed 7 years earlier. The ranch around them was transformed: new buildings, thriving livestock, fields of hay growing where once there had been only dust and struggling grass. In the distance, their 3 children played near the corral, watched over by Miguel's wife Rosa, who had become like a grandmother to them. "Do you remember the first thing you said to me?" Harrison asked, taking Violet's hand in his. "I told you not to even think about getting up," Violet said with a smile. "You were in no condition to go anywhere." "You were terrifying," Harrison admitted. "This strange woman ordering me around in my own home. I wanted to be angry about it, but I was too sick and too grateful. And now? Now you are still ordering me around, but I have learned to appreciate it." He pulled her close, kissing her temple. "You were right about everything you know. About pride being poor company in a grave. About needing to accept help. About choosing what I was really fighting for." "And what was it?" Violet asked, though she surely knew the answer. "What were you really fighting for?" Harrison looked around at the ranch, at their children, at the life they had built together from the ashes of his near death. "This," he said simply, "all of this. A home, a family, a future. But I could not have any of it until I learned to let someone in, until you made me rest and tended the ranch and showed me that I did not have to face everything alone." "We face things together now," Violet said. "Whatever comes, we handle it as partners." "Always," Harrison agreed, "for the rest of our lives." They stood there as the sun set, painting the Arizona sky in brilliant colors, and Harrison thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The pneumonia that nearly killed him. The woman who refused to let him die alone. The love that had grown between them, strong and steady and true. He had spent so long trying to prove he did not need help, trying to manage everything on his own, and it had nearly destroyed him. But Violet had shown him a different way, the way of partnership, of shared burdens and shared joys. She had saved his life, yes, but more than that, she had given him a reason to live. Years continued to pass, bringing the changes that time always brings. Henry grew into a capable young man who shared his father's love for the land and his mother's quick mind for numbers. Victoria proved to be a gifted writer and an even better teacher, taking over more of her mother's duties at the school as Violet focused increasingly on the ranch. Thomas, the youngest, inherited his father's stubbornness and his mother's compassion in equal measure, a combination that served him well as he grew. Harrison's hair began to gray at the temples, and Violet developed fine lines around her eyes from years of squinting against the Arizona sun. But they remained as devoted to each other as they had been in those early days, perhaps more so. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, good years and lean ones, always together, always supporting each other. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Harrison commissioned a new sign for the ranch gate. It read, "Zane Family Ranch established 1875, rebuilt 1883. When Violet saw it, tears streamed down her face. "Rebuilt," she said, tracing the letters with her fingers. "That is exactly what we did, is it not? We rebuilt this place, rebuilt your life, built a family from nothing." "From nothing?" Harrison shook his head. "No, my love. We built it from something very precious, from compassion and stubbornness and love, from you refusing to ride past a dying man, from me finally being smart enough to let you help, from both of us choosing to take a chance on each other." They stood together under that sign, and Harrison thought about all the years still ahead of them, the grandchildren they would someday welcome, the legacy they would leave behind, the story they would tell of how their love had saved not just a man, but a ranch, a dream, a future. The desert wind blew across the land, carrying with it the scent of sage and possibility. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed contentedly. In the house behind them, their children were laughing over something, and Harrison Zane, who had once been too proud and too stubborn to accept help, who had worked himself to the edge of death because he thought he had to do everything alone, wrapped his arms around his wife and thanked God for the day she had refused to ride past his ranch. Because that choice, her choice to stop, to help, to stay, had changed everything. It had saved his life and given him a future he could never have imagined. It had taught him that strength was not about standing alone, but about knowing when to accept the hand that reached out to help. It had brought him love in its truest form. The seasons turned as seasons always do in the Arizona territory. Summers blazed hot, and winters brought cold nights and occasional snow. Springs painted the desert in unexpected colors, and autumns mellowed into golden afternoons. Through it all, the Zane family ranch endured and prospered. When Henry turned 18 in 1902, he took over much of the day-to-day management of the cattle operation, working alongside his father but bringing fresh ideas and energy to the work. Victoria opened a second schoolhouse closer to Tucson, riding in 3 days a week to teach while continuing to help on the ranch the other days. Thomas, at 14, was already showing signs of becoming an even better horseman than his father, with plans to focus on expanding the horse breeding operation. Harrison, now 45 years old and finally willing to admit that he could not do everything himself, found himself in the unusual position of being able to step back and watch his children carry forward the legacy he and Violet had built. It was a strange feeling, relinquishing control, but also a good one. He had done what he set out to do, kept the ranch alive, built something lasting, created a family that would endure. On a quiet evening in early summer, Harrison sat on the porch with Violet, a scene they had enacted thousands of times over the years. But this time felt different, more reflective. Perhaps it was seeing Henry take on more responsibility, or watching Victoria become a teacher like her mother, or recognizing in Thomas the same stubborn determination that had nearly killed Harrison all those years ago. I've been thinking about writing it all down, Harrison said suddenly. Our story, how we met, how you saved my life, how we built this life together. I want the children to have it someday, and their children after them. Violet looked surprised but pleased. That is a lovely idea, though I think you might be making me sound more heroic than I actually was. I just did what anyone would have done. That is where you are wrong, Harrison said firmly. Most people would have ridden right past. They would have told themselves it was not their problem, or that someone else would help, or that they did not have time to get involved. You stopped. You stayed. You cared for a stranger and then fell in love with him despite all his flaws. Your flaws are what make you interesting, Violet said with a smile. A perfect man would be terribly boring. I am many things, but I have never been boring. Harrison took her hand, studying the calluses and the lines, the marks of years of hard work. I want them to know, Violet. Our children, our grandchildren, everyone who comes after, I want them to know that sometimes the greatest act of courage is accepting help when you need it. That pride can kill you as surely as any illness. That love can rebuild what desperation tears down. Then write it, Violet said softly. Tell our story. I will help you remember the details. So Harrison began to write, working in the evenings by lamplight while Violet corrected papers from her students or mended clothes or simply sat nearby offering her presence and occasional corrections to his memory. He wrote about the pneumonia, about collapsing in the yard, about waking to find a stranger caring for him. He wrote about Violet's competence and compassion, about the way she had taken over the ranch without making him feel diminished. He wrote about falling in love, about their wedding, about building a life together. The process took months, but when he was finished, Harrison had a complete account of their story bound in leather and written in his careful hand. He gave it to Violet on their 15th anniversary, and she cried as she read it, occasionally correcting small details, but mostly just shaking her head in wonder at how much they had been through together. You make me sound like a saint, she said when she finished. I make you sound like what you are the woman who saved my life and gave me a reason to keep living. Harrison took the book from her hands and set it aside, pulling her close instead. I mean every word, Violet. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. And you are the most stubborn, wonderful, infuriating man I have ever known, she replied. But her eyes were soft with love. I would do it all again, you know. Find you in that yard, force you to rest, stay to tend the ranch. Even knowing how hard it would be sometimes, how much work was ahead of us, I would make the same choice. So would I, Harrison said. I would choose you every time, in every life. They sat together as the stars emerged one by one overhead, the desert cooling around them and the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Inside the house, they could hear their children talking and laughing, preparing for bed. The cattle were secure, the horses fed, the land cared for. Everything was as it should be. More years passed, bringing with them the turn of the century and all the changes that entailed. The railroad expanded its reach, making it easier to ship cattle to market. Automobiles began to appear in Tucson, strange mechanical creatures that spooked the horses. The territory moved closer to statehood, and there was talk of Arizona joining the Union within the decade. Through it all, Harrison and Violet remained the steady heart of the ranch and their family. They celebrated as Henry married a young woman from a neighboring ranch in 1905 and welcomed their first grandchild, a girl named Rose, the following year. They supported Victoria when she decided to marry one of her fellow teachers and move to Phoenix, though they missed her terribly. They guided Thomas as he grew into manhood and took over the horse breeding operation, proving to have an almost magical touch with the animals. In 1908, on a cool October evening, Harrison and Violet celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a gathering of family and friends that filled the ranch house and spilled out onto the lawn. Nearly 100 people attended, a testament to the connections they had built over the years and the respect they had earned in the community. As the party wound down and the guests departed, Harrison and Violet found themselves once again on the porch, looking out over the land they had saved together. 25 years, Violet marveled. It seems like yesterday that I found you in that yard, and also like a lifetime ago. Both things can be true, Harrison said. He was 51 now, his hair more gray than dark. His face weathered by years under the Arizona sun, but his eyes were still bright when he looked at his wife, still full of the love that had sustained them through everything. We have built something remarkable, you and I. We have, Violet agreed. She was 48, with silver threading through her auburn hair and permanent smile lines around her eyes. Not just the ranch, though that is certainly an achievement, but the family, the community, the life we share. That is what I am most proud of. I could not have done any of it without you. Harrison spoke the truth he had learned so long ago, the lesson that had saved his life. I know I said that at the beginning, but I need you to know I still believe it. Every single day I am grateful that you stopped that evening, that you cared enough to help a stranger, that you stayed. Where else would I have gone? Violet asked, taking his hand. You became my home, Harrison. You and this ranch and our children. This is where I was always meant to be. I just did not know it until I found you lying in that yard, too stubborn to die, but too sick to keep living without help. They laughed together, the sound carrying across the desert night, and then they simply sat, holding hands and watching the stars wheel overhead, content in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious, a partnership built on mutual respect, a love that had weathered every storm, a life that had meaning and purpose. The years continued their steady march forward, bringing joys and sorrows in equal measure. Miguel passed away peacefully in 1910, surrounded by his family and mourned by everyone who had known him. Rafael continued working on the ranch, though at a slower pace, training his sons to take over his duties. More grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with the sounds of children's laughter again. Harrison's health remained good, though he moved a bit slower and tired more easily. The pneumonia that had nearly killed him left no lasting damage, thanks to Violet's care all those years ago. He often thought about those dark days, about how close he had come to losing everything, and he never stopped being grateful that fate had brought Violet past his ranch at exactly the right moment. In the spring of 1912, Arizona finally achieved statehood, becoming the 48th state in the Union. Harrison and Violet traveled to Phoenix for the celebration, joining with thousands of others to mark the historic occasion. It felt like a fitting milestone, as if the territory that had been the backdrop for their love story was finally coming into its own, just as they had all those years ago. The ranch continued to prosper under the combined management of Harrison, Henry, and Thomas. They weathered droughts and economic downturns, adapted to new technologies and changing markets, but always held fast to the core values that Violet had helped Harrison rediscover: community, mutual support, the strength that comes from allowing others to help shoulder your burdens. On a warm evening in June of 1913, as Harrison and Violet celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner at home, Harrison raised his glass in a toast. "To the woman who saved my life," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "To my wife, my partner, my love. Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for staying. Thank you for building this life with me." Violet's eyes glistened with tears, but she was smiling. "To the man who taught me what home means, who showed me that strength and vulnerability can exist together, who loves me even when I am bossy and stubborn and refuse to let him work when he has pneumonia." They both laughed at that, remembering. "Thank you for giving me a place to belong, Harrison. Thank you for our family, our life, our love." They clinked their glasses together and drank, and then Harrison stood and offered his hand to his wife. She took it without hesitation, and they walked out onto the porch together, moving in the familiar rhythm of 3 decades together. The desert stretched before them, beautiful in the fading light. The ranch was quiet, the work done for the day, In the distance, their grandchildren played while their parents watched over them. Everything was peaceful. Everything was right. If you could go back, Harrison asked suddenly, back to that day when you found me in the yard, would you change anything? Violet did not hesitate. Not a single thing. Every choice I made led me here, to this moment, to this life with you. How could I wish for anything different? Even the hard times, the years when money was tight, the nights we stayed up worrying about the children? Especially those times, Violet said firmly. They taught us what we were capable of, showed us how strong we could be together. The easy times are pleasant, but it is the hard times that forge a real partnership. Harrison pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the familiar comfort of her body against his. 30 years, and she still made his heart race. 30 years, and he still thanked God every day for bringing her into his life. I love you, he said simply. Then, now, always. And I love you, Violet replied. My stubborn, wonderful cowboy who worked through pneumonia because no one helped, who let me make him rest and tend the ranch, who became my entire world. They stood together as the stars emerged. Two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment, who had built something lasting from the ashes of near tragedy. The ranch would continue after them, passed down through their children and grandchildren. The story Harrison had written would be read by future generations, a testament to the power of compassion and stubbornness and love. But in that moment, none of that mattered as much as the simple fact of being together. Hand in hand, heart to heart, facing whatever came next as they always had as partners, as lovers, as husband and wife. The desert wind whispered across the land, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow. And Harrison Zane, who had once been too proud to accept help, who had nearly died alone because of that pride, held his wife close and knew that he had everything he would ever need. Because Violet had stopped that day. She had refused to ride past. She had cared for a stranger and stayed to tend his ranch and his heart, and in doing so she had saved not just his life but his very soul.